Have you ever thought that your closest family member would be the one to humiliate you in front of strangers? I'm Jessica, and this story will make you question who really deserves your trust within your own family. According to recent studies, 27% of Americans have cut ties with at least one family member. And after hearing my story, you'll understand exactly why. That day, I simply wanted to withdraw $100 from my own account. My sister Sarah was the bank manager there. She looked at me with pure contempt and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "We don't serve beggars here." 5 minutes later, when I requested to withdraw $3.5 billion, the entire bank froze. And Sarah, she dropped to her knees begging me for forgiveness. Growing up in the Thompson household, everything looked picture perfect from the outside. My parents, both successful professionals, lived in a beautiful colonial home with manicured lawns and luxury cars in the driveway. But behind closed doors, our family operated on a twisted hierarchy that would shape the rest of our lives. Sarah, 3 years older than me, was what psychologists call the golden child. From the moment she could walk, everything she did was celebrated, praised, and rewarded. When she brought home a B+, it was displayed on the refrigerator with pride. When I brought home straight A's, the response was always, "Well, that's what we expect from you, Jessica." The financial disparity was even more obvious. Sarah's college education was fully funded. Not just tuition, but a brand new car, a luxury apartment near campus, and a generous monthly allowance that covered everything from designer clothes to spring break trips to Europe. She graduated with an MBA from a prestigious business school, debt-free and connected to a network of influential people who would fast-track her career. Meanwhile, I worked 3 jobs through high school just to save money for community college. When I asked my parents for help with tuition, the response was always the same. Sarah needed more support because business school is more demanding. You're smart, you'll figure it out. So I did figure it out. Scholarships, student loans, night shifts at a diner, weekend work at a tech repair shop. Every dollar I earned went toward building my future, while Sarah coasted on family money. The gaslighting started early and never stopped. Family dinners were exercises in subtle humiliation. "Sarah closed another big deal today," my father would announce proudly. "She's really making something of herself." Then, turning to me, "Jessica, are you still working at that little computer place? When are you going to find a real career?" When I started my first tech company at 22, bootstrapped from savings I'd accumulated working those multiple jobs, the family response was dismissive. "Oh, Jessica's playing with computers again?" Sarah would say with a laugh. "It's cute that she thinks she's an entrepreneur." When that first company failed after 8 months, Sarah's reaction was particularly cruel. "Well, at least now she can focus on finding a stable job like normal people." What they didn't know, what I never told them, was that the failure of my first company had taught me invaluable lessons. I'd learned about market timing, customer acquisition, product development, and investor relations. More importantly, I'd built a network of tech professionals who recognized my potential even when my own family couldn't see it. By the time I was 25, I'd launched my second company. This time, I was smarter, more strategic, and completely focused. I kept my family at arm's length, sharing nothing about my business progress, my growing team, or the increasing interest from major corporations who wanted to partner with us. To them, I was still just Jessica, the family disappointment who worked somewhere in tech and couldn't seem to get her life together like successful Sarah. Sarah, meanwhile, had landed a management position at First National Bank, one of the largest regional banks in our area. She made sure everyone knew about her corner office, her company car, and her impressive salary. Family gatherings became opportunities for her to hold court, sharing stories about her important clients and challenging business decisions. She spoke in banking jargon, name-dropped wealthy customers, and positioned herself as the family's financial expert. If Jessica ever needs career advice, she'd say, with that patronizing smile, she knows where to find me. Banking is all about understanding money, and let's face it, some people are just naturally better with numbers than others. The manipulation was so subtle, so consistent, that I'd almost started to believe it myself. Maybe I wasn't cut out for business success. Maybe my ambitions were unrealistic. Maybe Sarah really was the naturally gifted one, and I was just struggling to keep up with someone who was simply better than me. But then my company landed its first major contract, then another. Within 18 months, we'd grown from a 3-person startup to a 50-employee operation serving Fortune 500 clients. The revenue numbers were staggering, but I kept everything quiet. I'd learned that sharing good news with my family only invited criticism, backhanded compliments, or ways to diminish my achievements. The red flags were everywhere, but I'd been conditioned to ignore them for so long that they felt normal. Sarah's constant comments about my financial status weren't sisterly concern. They were calculated attempts to maintain her position as the family's success story. When she'd helpfully suggest that I should consider going back to school for a real degree, or recommend that I apply for entry-level positions at stable companies, she wasn't trying to help me. She was trying to keep me in the box she'd created for me. The information control was particularly insidious. Sarah knew I banked at First National. I'd chosen that bank specifically to support her career, thinking it would strengthen our relationship. She had access to my account information, could see my deposits and withdrawals, but she never bothered to actually look at the numbers or ask about the sources of my income. She'd made assumptions about my financial situation based on her predetermined narrative about who I was supposed to be. At family gatherings, she'd position herself as the financial advisor, the one with real-world experience in money management. "Jessica, you really should start thinking about retirement planning," she'd say in front of our parents. "I know it's hard when you don't have a steady corporate job, but even small contributions can add up over time." The implication was always clear. I was financially struggling, needed guidance, and should be grateful for her expertise. The emotional blackmail was wrapped in family loyalty. "We're all we have," she'd say during her more manipulative moments. "Family should support each other, especially when one of us is still finding their way." But the support only flowed in one direction. When Sarah needed help moving into her new condo, I spent an entire weekend hauling boxes and furniture. When she needed a date for her company's holiday party, because her boyfriend had canceled last minute, I rearranged my schedule to accompany her. But when I mentioned that I was working on an important project and might miss a family dinner, the response was immediate criticism about my priorities and commitment to family. The breaking point had been building for months. I'd been watching Sarah's behavior with new eyes, finally recognizing the patterns that had shaped our entire relationship. The constant undermining disguised as concern, the public humiliation masked as helpful advice, the way she positioned herself as the authority on success, while simultaneously working to ensure I remained in a subordinate position. When I decided to test her true character, I chose the setting deliberately. Her bank during business hours with customers present. I wanted to see how she'd treat me when she held all the power, when she was in her professional environment, surrounded by people who looked up to her as a leader and decision maker. I dressed simply that day, jeans, a plain sweater, comfortable shoes, nothing that would indicate wealth or success. I wanted to appear exactly as Sarah had always seen me, the struggling younger sister who couldn't quite get her act together. I walked into First National Bank just after the lunch rush, when the lobby was busy but not overcrowded, when there would be enough witnesses but not so many that the scene would become chaotic. The marble floors clicked under my shoes as I approached the customer service area. Sarah was visible through the glass walls of her office, talking on the phone with animated gestures that suggested she was handling something important. I waited in line like any other customer, watching her through the glass, preparing myself for what was about to happen. When my turn came, I approached the teller window with a simple request. "I'd like to withdraw $100 from my checking account, please." I handed over my ID and debit card, maintaining steady eye contact with the young teller who looked like she couldn't be more than 22 years old. That's when Sarah noticed me. The recognition hit her face in stages. First confusion, then surprise, then immediate embarrassment. She ended her phone call abruptly and walked out of her office, her heels clicking authoritatively on the marble floor. I could see her mindset shifting as she approached. This was her territory, her domain, and she was about to assert her authority in front of her employees and customers. "Jessica?" she said, her voice carrying just enough surprise to sound natural to anyone listening. "What are you doing here?" "Just making a simple transaction," I replied calmly, withdrawing some cash. Sarah looked at the amount on the teller's screen, $100, and something shifted in her expression. It was subtle, but I caught it. A flash of disgust, mixed with what looked like satisfaction. Here was confirmation of everything she'd always believed about me. That I was small-time, barely scraping by. The kind of person who needed to make special trips to the bank for such tiny amounts. $100, she said, loud enough that several nearby customers turned to look. "That's it?" The teller looked uncomfortable, glancing between us with obvious confusion about the relationship dynamics playing out in front of her. Other customers were starting to notice the interaction, sensing tension without understanding its source. "Yes," I said simply, $100. Sarah straightened her shoulders, assuming her full professional authority. Her voice carried clearly across the lobby as she delivered the line that would change everything between us. "I'm sorry, but we don't serve beggars here." The silence that followed was deafening. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Every eye in the lobby turned toward us. The young teller's mouth actually fell open. An elderly gentleman reading a newspaper lowered it slowly, staring at the scene unfolding before him. I felt the familiar surge of humiliation that Sarah's words had always triggered, but this time something was different. This time I was ready. This time I had the power to respond in a way that would expose everything about who she really was and who I had become. "I see," I said quietly, my voice steady and calm. "In that case, let me make a different request." I leaned toward the teller, maintaining eye contact while speaking clearly enough for everyone in the vicinity to hear. "I'd like to withdraw $3.5 billion, please." The teller blinked rapidly, certain she'd misheard. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" $3.5 billion, I repeated, spelling it out slowly. 3.5 billion. Sarah's face went through a series of transformations that would have been comical if the situation weren't so serious. First came confusion. Surely this was some kind of joke. Then came panic as the teller began typing on her computer, her eyes widening as she accessed my account information. The computer system took several seconds to load, during which the entire lobby seemed to hold its breath. Then the numbers appeared on the screen, and the teller's face went completely white. "Ma'am," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "I'm going to need to call my manager." But Sarah wasn't waiting for managers. She was staring at the computer screen, watching as the truth about her little sister's financial situation unfolded before her eyes. The number was real. The account was real. The woman she'd just called a beggar had more money in her checking account than the bank processed in an entire quarter. "Jessica?" Sarah whispered, but I wasn't looking at her anymore. I was watching the teller fumble with her phone, calling for backup, for authorization, for someone who could handle a transaction that would trigger every security protocol the bank had in place. Within minutes, the bank manager emerged from his office, followed by what appeared to be every senior staff member on duty. They approached our little corner of the lobby with expressions of professional concern, mixed with barely contained excitement. It's not every day that someone requests to withdraw $3.5 billion, and certainly not someone who'd just been publicly humiliated by one of their own managers. "Ms. Thompson," the bank manager extended his hand, his voice respectful and slightly awed. "I'm David Rodriguez, the branch manager. I understand you'd like to make a significant withdrawal today." "That's correct," I said, shaking his hand while maintaining perfect composure. "Though given the customer service I've just received, I'm reconsidering whether this is the right financial institution for my needs." The manager's eyes immediately shifted to Sarah, who was standing frozen beside the teller counter, her face cycling through shades of red and white as the full implications of the situation became clear. Her career, her reputation, her position as the family success story, everything was crumbling in real time. "Ma'am," the manager continued, his voice taking on an almost pleading quality, "I assure you that any service issues can be addressed immediately. Perhaps we could discuss this in my office." But I wasn't done yet. The crowd that had witnessed Sarah's humiliation needed to see the complete reversal, needed to understand exactly what had just happened. More importantly, Sarah needed to experience the full weight of her actions, needed to feel the same public shame she'd just inflicted on me. "Actually," I said, raising my voice just enough to ensure everyone could hear, "I think this conversation should remain public. After all, your employee just made a public declaration about this bank's service policies. I want to make sure everyone understands what those policies really are." Sarah's knees buckled first, Not metaphorically, literally. She sank down toward the floor, her hands reaching out to steady herself against the counter, her eyes filling with tears as she finally, truly understood what she had done. "Jessica, please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I didn't know. I didn't understand. Please forgive me." But forgiveness, I had learned, required more than just an apology. It required accountability, growth, and a genuine commitment to change. And Sarah's journey toward earning that forgiveness was just beginning. The silence in that bank lobby felt eternal. Sarah remained on her knees beside the teller counter, her perfectly styled hair now disheveled, her professional composure completely shattered. The customers who had witnessed her cruel comment about beggars were now staring at a woman who had just publicly humiliated herself in the most spectacular way possible. I looked down at my sister, really looked at her, and saw something I'd never seen before. Not just fear about her job or embarrassment about her mistake, but genuine recognition of the pain she'd caused. For the first time in our lives, Sarah was seeing me as I really was, not as the failure she'd convinced herself I had to be to maintain her own sense of superiority. "Sarah," I said quietly, my voice carrying clearly in the hushed lobby. "Stand up." She struggled to her feet, her hands shaking as she smoothed her skirt and tried to regain some semblance of professional dignity. But the damage was done. Every person in that bank had watched the golden child of the Thompson family reveal her true character, and then crumble when faced with the consequences. "I want you to understand something," I continued, speaking not just to Sarah, but to everyone listening. Words have power. When someone in a position of authority chooses to humiliate another person, they're not just affecting that moment, they're revealing something fundamental about their character. They're showing everyone exactly who they choose to be when they think they have power over someone else. The bank manager, David Rodriguez, stepped forward carefully. "Ms. Thompson, perhaps we could handle this matter more privately." "No," I said firmly. "This happened publicly, and it needs to be addressed publicly. Your employee made a decision to shame someone in front of all these people. These same people deserve to understand what really happened here today." I turned back to Sarah, who was struggling to maintain eye contact. "For 28 years, you've positioned yourself as the successful one in our family. You've made comments about my career, my financial situation, my life choices, all while never bothering to actually know anything real about my life. You assumed that because I didn't follow your path, I must be failing." "Jessica, Sarah started, but I held up my hand. "I'm not finished," I said. "You called me a beggar in front of all these people. You made that choice deliberately, loudly, to ensure maximum humiliation. You wanted everyone here to see you putting me in what you thought was my proper place. So now everyone gets to see the truth about both of us." The elderly gentleman who had been reading his newspaper earlier stepped closer. "Young lady," he said to Sarah, his voice stern, "I've been banking here for 30 years. I've never seen such unprofessional behavior from any employee, let alone a manager." A woman holding her toddler's hand nodded in agreement. "That was completely uncalled for. How do you speak to customers like that?" Sarah's face was cycling through shades of red as she realized that her behavior hadn't just cost her professionally, it had revealed her character to an entire room full of people who would remember this moment, who would tell others about what they'd witnessed. The question now, I said, addressing both Sarah and the bank manager, is what we're going to do about this. Because this isn't just about one cruel comment. This is about a pattern of behavior that suggests some serious problems with customer service training, professional conduct, and basic human decency. David Rodriguez was clearly calculating the potential fallout. A $3.5 billion account holder had been publicly humiliated by one of his managers. The liability issues alone were staggering, not to mention the reputational damage if this story spread beyond the bank walls. "Ms. Thompson," he said, addressing me with the kind of deference usually reserved for the bank's most important clients, "I want to assure you that this behavior doesn't represent our institution's values. We take customer service extremely seriously, and what happened here today is completely unacceptable." "Good," I replied. "Then you won't mind if we discuss exactly how you plan to address it." Sarah found her voice again, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Jessica, I'm so sorry. I didn't know about your success, about your company. I made assumptions and I was completely wrong." "That's exactly the problem, Sarah," I said. "You didn't know because you never bothered to ask. For years, you've made assumptions about my life based on what you needed to believe to feel superior. You never actually saw me as a person worthy of your curiosity or respect." I addressed the gathering crowd. "How many of you have assumptions about people based on how they're dressed, or what they drive, or where they work? How many of you think you can judge someone's worth by looking at them?" Several people shifted uncomfortably. The young mother with the toddler looked down at her casual clothes self-consciously. The elderly gentleman adjusted his simple cardigan. "That's human nature," I continued. "We all make quick judgments. But there's a difference between a private assumption and a public humiliation. There's a difference between a momentary thought and a deliberate choice to cause pain." The bank manager was taking notes, clearly documenting everything for what would undoubtedly be an extensive internal investigation. "Ms. Thompson," he said, "what would you need to see from us to restore your confidence in this institution?" It was a fair question, and one I'd been considering since the moment Sarah's cruel words had left her mouth. This wasn't just about revenge or even justice. It was about creating real change, both in Sarah's behavior and in the way this bank treated all its customers. 3 things, I said clearly. First, a comprehensive review of customer service policies and training. Every employee needs to understand that professional conduct isn't negotiable, regardless of their personal relationships or assumptions about customers. David nodded vigorously. "Absolutely, we can implement that immediately." Second, I continued, a public apology, not just to me, but to everyone who witnessed this behavior. The message needs to be clear that this kind of treatment is unacceptable and won't be tolerated. "Of course," David agreed. "We can arrange that right now if you'd like." "And third," I said, looking directly at Sarah, "mandatory sensitivity training and anger management counseling. Because this wasn't just a professional mistake. This was a personal attack rooted in some deep-seated issues that need to be addressed." Sarah's face went white. Professional development was one thing, but mandated counseling would become part of her permanent employment record. It was a consequence that would follow her throughout her career, a reminder of this moment every time she applied for a promotion or considered changing jobs. That seems reasonable, David said carefully, clearly calculating whether these terms were preferable to losing a $3.5 billion account and dealing with the potential lawsuit that could follow. But I wasn't done yet. The crowd was still listening, and this was an opportunity to turn a moment of cruelty into something educational, something that might prevent others from experiencing what I'd just endured. I want everyone here to understand something important, I said, raising my voice slightly. Success isn't always visible. Wealth doesn't always announce itself. Intelligence doesn't always wear expensive suits. And kindness should never depend on someone's apparent social status. The young teller who had processed my original $100 withdrawal request was staring at me with obvious admiration. "Ma'am," she said quietly, "I just want to say that what she did to you was wrong, regardless of your account balance. Every customer deserves respect." "Exactly," I said, smiling at her. "That's exactly right. Respect isn't something that should be earned through money or status. It's something every human being deserves, simply by being human." Sarah was crying now, not the manipulative tears I'd seen her use throughout our childhood to get out of trouble, but genuine tears of shame and recognition. For the first time in her life, she was truly seeing the impact of her behavior on another person. "Jessica," she said, her voice breaking, "I've been horrible to you for so long, not just today, but for years. I've made you feel small because making you small made me feel big. I turned our relationship into a competition that you didn't even know you were supposed to be playing." The honesty was startling. Sarah had never been capable of this level of self-awareness before, had never been able to see past her own needs and insecurities to recognize the pain she was causing others. "That's a start," I said, "but recognition is just the beginning. Real change requires consistent action over time. It requires examining all the ways you've used your position to diminish others, not just me." The bank manager cleared his throat. "Ms. Thompson, would you be willing to meet with our executive team next week to discuss the implementation of these changes? We want to ensure that we're addressing not just this incident, but the broader cultural issues that may have contributed to it." "I'll consider it," I said, "but first I want to see the public apology and the beginning of Sarah's professional development plan. Actions before meetings." David nodded quickly. "Of course, Sarah, I think you have something to say to Ms. Thompson and to all our customers who were present today." Sarah took a shaky breath and addressed the small crowd that had gathered. "I want to apologize to everyone who witnessed my behavior today. What I said was unprofessional, cruel, and completely unacceptable. I made assumptions about someone based on a single transaction, and I used my position to try to humiliate her publicly. That's not who I want to be, and it's not what you should expect from this bank or its employees." She turned to me, tears streaming down her face. "Jessica, I'm sorry for today, but I'm even more sorry for all the years of making you feel like you weren't good enough. I was wrong about everything, and I hope someday you can forgive me." The crowd began to disperse, conversations resuming in hushed tones as people processed what they'd witnessed. The elderly gentleman approached me before leaving. "Young woman," he said quietly, "you handled that with remarkable grace. I hope your sister learned something important today." "Thank you," I replied. "I hope so too." As the lobby returned to normal banking operations, David Rodriguez gestured toward his office. Miss Thompson, would you like to discuss your banking needs in private? I imagine you have questions about how we can better serve an account of your size. Actually, I said, glancing at Sarah, who was still standing by the teller counter, looking lost and ashamed. I'd like to speak with my sister first, privately. David nodded and discreetly moved away, leaving Sarah and me standing alone in the now quiet corner of the lobby. Sarah, I said softly, do you want to know the real tragedy in all this? She nodded, unable to speak. I chose this bank because I wanted to support your career. I've been banking here for 3 years, watching you get promoted, feeling proud of your success. I never said anything because I wanted you to succeed on your own merits, without any help from me. I thought I was being a good sister by staying in the background. Sarah's face crumpled. You've been supporting me all along and I didn't even know. That's right, and not just financially, emotionally too. I've spent our entire adult relationship trying to find ways to connect with you, to build a real sisterly bond, but you were so invested in seeing me as a failure that you couldn't see the person who actually loved you and wanted good things for you. I've wasted so much time, Sarah whispered. So much time competing with you instead of celebrating you. Why didn't you ever tell me about your success? Because I knew how you'd react, I said honestly. I knew you'd find ways to diminish it, to explain why it didn't count or why it wasn't as impressive as your achievements. I was protecting myself from exactly the kind of treatment you gave me today. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, absorbing the full weight of what I'd said. Finally, she looked up at me with something I'd never seen in her eyes before. Genuine respect. What can I do? She asked. How can I possibly make this right? You start by doing the work, I said. The counseling, the training, the self-examination. You figure out why you needed to make me small to feel big about yourself. And then you work on becoming the kind of person who lifts others up instead of tearing them down. And us? She asked hesitantly. Is there any chance for us to have a real relationship someday? I considered the question carefully. The old Jessica would have rushed to reassure her, would have minimized the damage to preserve family harmony. But I wasn't that person anymore. Maybe, I said, but it's going to take time, and it's going to require you to actually get to know me as I really am, not as you need me to be for your own comfort. Can you do that? Sarah straightened her shoulders, and for the first time since I'd known her, I saw real determination instead of entitled confidence. I want to try. I want to be worthy of having you as a sister. 3 months later, I sat in a coffee shop across from Sarah, watching her stir her latte nervously as she prepared to share something important. I finished the anger management program last week, she said quietly, and I've been seeing Dr. Martinez for individual therapy twice a week. How's that going? I asked, genuinely curious. Hard, she admitted. Really hard. Turns out I've been using you as an emotional punching bag for most of our lives because I was terrified of not being perfect. Every time you succeeded at something, it threatened my identity as the successful one. I nodded, appreciating her honesty. That must be difficult to recognize. The hardest part, Sarah continued, is realizing how much I missed. Dr. Martinez asked me to tell her about you, really tell her, not just my complaints or assumptions. And I realized I couldn't do it. I don't know your favorite color or what kind of music you like, or what makes you laugh. I've spent so much energy managing my image of you that I never bothered to learn who you actually are. So what do you want to know? I asked. Sarah's face lit up with something that looked like hope. Everything. I want to know about your company, your friends, your dreams, your fears. I want to know my sister. My favorite color is deep purple, I said, smiling. I listen to jazz when I'm coding and punk rock when I work out. I'm terrified of spiders but love horror movies. I've been to 32 countries, but I've never been camping. I hate olives but love anchovies, which makes ordering pizza complicated. Sarah laughed, a real laugh, not the performative sound I'd grown accustomed to. Tell me about your company. How did you build something so successful? For the next 2 hours, I shared stories I'd never told anyone in my family. The late nights debugging code, the investor meetings that went nowhere, the moment when our first major client signed on, the day we knew we'd made it. Sarah listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions, celebrating my victories instead of finding ways to diminish them. I'm so proud of you, she said finally, and I'm so sorry I wasn't there to support you through all of this. You're here now, I said. That's what matters. The bank wants to make you their signature client, Sarah said with a small smile. David has been working on a whole presentation about how to serve high net worth individuals better. Your feedback from that day has changed a lot of their policies. Good, I said. Maybe some other person won't have to endure what I did. And me? Sarah asked quietly. How am I doing with the changes? I considered the question carefully. The old Sarah would have been pushing for reassurance, for immediate forgiveness, for a return to the status quo. This Sarah was asking for honest feedback and seemed prepared to hear the truth. You're different, I said, more thoughtful, more curious about other people. I can see you making an effort to really listen instead of just waiting for your turn to talk. It's an ongoing process, Sarah admitted. Some days I catch myself falling back into old patterns. But Dr. Martinez says that recognizing the patterns is the first step to changing them. What about work? I asked. They moved me to a different department, Sarah said. Customer relations and community outreach. David said my experience could help them build better policies for treating all customers with dignity. It's actually more interesting than traditional banking. I'm working on programs to help small business owners access capital, financial literacy workshops for teenagers, things like that. That sounds like good work, I said, meaning it. It is, and Jessica. Sarah paused, looking nervous again. I told Mom and Dad about what really happened that day, the whole truth. I felt my stomach tighten. How did that go? About as well as you'd expect, Sarah said with a grimace. Dad was furious at me for jeopardizing the family's relationship with you. Mom cried for 3 hours. They want to see you, to apologize for all the years they didn't see what was really happening. I'm not ready for that yet, I said honestly. I know. I told them you might never be ready, and that would be their consequence to live with. They're going to have to earn the right to a relationship with you, just like I am. The growth in that statement was remarkable. The old Sarah would have pressured me to forgive our parents immediately, to prioritize family harmony over my own emotional well-being. This Sarah understood that forgiveness couldn't be demanded or rushed. Thank you, I said. That means a lot. I have something else to tell you, Sarah said, reaching into her purse. I got you something. She pulled out a small wrapped box and slid it across the table. It's not much, but it's chosen specifically for you, the real you, not who I thought you were. I unwrapped the box to find a simple silver bracelet with a small pendant shaped like a phoenix. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. It's beautiful, I said, genuinely touched. I wanted something that represented your strength, Sarah said. Your ability to rise from challenges stronger than before. And maybe it could represent both of us, rising from the ashes of our old relationship to build something better. I fastened the bracelet around my wrist, feeling the weight of the pendant against my skin. I love it. So, Sarah said, taking a deep breath, where do we go from here? I looked across the table at my sister, really looked at her. For the first time in our lives, I saw someone who was genuinely trying to change, someone who was doing the hard work of examining her own behavior and taking responsibility for the pain she'd caused. We keep building, I said. Slowly, carefully, honestly, we learn who we are to each other when we're not competing or performing or trying to maintain some image. We figure out what a healthy sister relationship looks like for us. I'd like that, Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. I'd like that very much. As we left the coffee shop together, I realized that the woman walking beside me was genuinely becoming someone I could respect and maybe, eventually, trust completely. The journey wasn't over. Healing from decades of dysfunction doesn't happen overnight. But for the first time in our lives, we were walking in the same direction instead of trying to tear each other down. That moment in the bank lobby, as humiliating and painful as it had become a catalyst for transformation, not just for Sarah, but for our entire family dynamic. Sometimes the worst moments of our lives become the foundation for the best changes we could never have imagined. The phoenix on my bracelet caught the sunlight as we walked, and I smiled. We were both rising, both learning to fly, in ways we'd never thought possible. And for the first time in 28 years, I was genuinely excited to see where our relationship would go.